The last time I saw my reflection in a mirror, I was still human. That was 3 years ago, before Project Exodus, before the government decided to play God with my DNA. Now, I avoid mirrors. The thing that stares back at me, I can't bear to look at it. But I should start at the beginning, when I was still Eli Thompson, Special Forces operator, and tell you how I became this abomination. It began with a simple phone call on a rainy evening in October. I remember the droplets pattering against my apartment window as an unfamiliar voice asked me if I would be interested in serving my country in a unique way. They knew my record: Distinguished Service Cross, multiple tours, specialized training in extreme environments. What they didn't tell me was that they had been watching me for years, studying my genetic profile, monitoring my psychological evaluations. They needed someone who could survive what they had planned. The facility was buried deep beneath the Nevada desert, a sprawling complex of white corridors and reinforced steel doors. On my first day, Dr. Isabella Wright met me in a sterile conference room. She was tall, with silver-streaked black hair pulled back in a severe bun, and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail about me. Behind her stood Dr. James Morrison, a geneticist whose nervous energy made him constantly fidget with his pen. "Mr. Thompson," Dr. Wright said, her voice clinical and precise, "you're here because you possess certain genetic markers that make you ideal for our program. Project Exodus represents the next step in human evolution, and you'll be at the forefront of this breakthrough." I remember nodding, feeling proud to be chosen. What a fool I was. They had me sign countless documents, each page filled with scientific jargon and vague descriptions of biological enhancement procedures. I should have read between the lines, should have noticed how they never quite explained what these procedures would entail. The first phase began immediately. They housed me in a private room that felt more like a prison cell, monitoring equipment built into the walls, cameras tracking my every move. The treatment started with injections, serums that burned through my veins like liquid fire. I would lie awake at night, feeling my body temperature spike, my muscles spasm and contort. I wasn't alone in the facility. Sometimes, in the early hours of the morning, I would hear screams echoing through the ventilation system. Other test subjects I learned later who weren't as compatible with the procedures as I was. I never saw them, but I heard the whispered conversations between staff members. Tales of horrific mutations, of bodies warping in ways that defied natural law. Dr. Morrison supervised my transformation with an enthusiasm that bordered on obsession. He would spend hours taking samples, running tests, documenting every change. "Remarkable," he would mumble, pressing his fingers against my skin as it began to harden and change texture. "The integration rate is unprecedented." The changes were subtle at first. Enhanced strength, improved reflexes, accelerated healing, all things that could be explained away as successful human enhancement. But then the true metamorphosis began. I first noticed it in the shower, patches of my skin beginning to darken and thicken, taking on a texture like armored plates. My fingers lengthened, joints developing new articulation points. My vision changed, colors shifting into spectrums I had never seen before. Dr. Wright seemed pleased with my progress, but I caught the fear in her assistants' eyes when they came to draw blood or deliver meals. They saw what I was becoming before I did. The pain was constant, a deep cellular agony as my body reconstructed itself according to their design. But worse than the physical pain was the psychological torture of feeling my humanity slip away, piece by piece. One night, about 6 months into the program, I woke to find I could sense the fear of the guard stationed outside my door, not just see it or hear it. I could feel it, taste it like copper on my tongue. His terror was a tangible thing, a scent that made something primitive and hungry stir in my reconstructed gut. That was the night I realized they hadn't just changed my body, they had created something that fed on human emotion. The government officials who came to observe my progress stopped seeing me as a person. In their eyes, I became an asset, a weapon to be pointed at whatever target they chose. They would stand behind protective glass, discussing my capabilities and potential applications as if I were a piece of military hardware. Their fear was delicious, but their cold calculation was worse. I overheard things I wasn't meant to hear, fragments of conversations about dimensional barriers and cross-reality deployment. Dr. Wright argued frequently with her superiors about the pace of my transformation, insisting that rushing the process could lead to catastrophic results. But the military representatives were impatient. They wanted their weapon ready. If I had known then what I know now, I would have found a way to end it all before the final stages of mutation took hold. Because what I became, it's beyond description. The thing that I am now barely resembles anything that could be called human, but I was their success story, their proof of concept. The others, the failed experiments I heard dying in the night, they were the lucky ones. They didn't live to see what this project was really about. The facility began to change around me as my transformation progressed. They moved me to a reinforced containment chamber deep underground, with walls thick enough to withstand an artillery strike. The air was always cold, regulated to accommodate my new biology. They fed me through automated systems because none of the staff would come near me anymore. Only Dr. Wright would still approach, her fascination overriding her instinct for self-preservation. I lost track of time in that underground prison. Days blurred together in a haze of tests and procedures. My memories of my former life began to feel like someone else's dreams. But through it all, I held on to one thing, my hatred for the people who had done this to me. It festered inside me, growing stronger as my humanity weakened. I thought that would be my fate, to exist as their captive weapon until they found a way to dispose of me. Then came the day of the breach, when everything changed. But that's when this story truly becomes a nightmare. The first sign that something was wrong came 3 weeks before the incident. I was lying on my reinforced bed, watching the shadows play across my containment chamber's ceiling when I felt it, a vibration, not through the walls or floor, but through reality itself. Like a tuning fork had been struck against the fabric of space around me. The facility's equipment picked it up too. Monitors flickered, lights dimmed, and in the observation room above my chamber, I could hear the panicked voices of technicians trying to explain away the inexplicable. My enhanced senses picked up fragments of their conversations, energy spikes, dimensional resonance, containment protocols. Dr. Wright spent hours reviewing data, her face illuminated by computer screens as she studied readouts I couldn't understand. But I could sense her excitement, barely contained beneath her professional exterior. Whatever was happening, it was something she had been waiting for. The other specimens in the facility, I could feel them too now. Their agitation grew with each passing day. In the chambers adjacent to mine, they threw themselves against their containment walls, driven into a frenzy by the same sensations I was experiencing. Some nights, their screams took on a different quality, as if they were no longer screaming in pain, but in recognition of something approaching. I began to dream of another place, a world bathed in violet light, where the very air seemed alive with possibility and terror. In these dreams, my monstrous form didn't feel wrong or unnatural. It felt like an adaptation, a necessary evolution. I would wake from these visions covered in a cold sweat, my altered flesh pulsing with anticipation. Dr. Morrison noticed the changes in my readings. Your neural patterns are showing increased synchronization with unknown frequencies, he told me during one of his observations, his excitement overshadowing his usual nervousness. It's as if your transformed physiology is resonating with something. The something he referred to made itself known on a seemingly ordinary evening. I was undergoing another battery of tests, electrodes attached to my mutated flesh, when the facility's power grid began to fluctuate wildly. Emergency lights strobed as backup generators kicked in, only to fail moments later. I felt it before I saw it, a tear in reality itself. It started as a pinprick of darkness in the center of my chamber, a spot where light seemed to fold in on itself. The monitoring equipment went haywire, alarms blaring as energy readings spiked beyond their measurable limits. Dr. Wright's voice came over the intercom, tight with controlled tension. "All personnel, initiate emergency protocol Delta. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill." But beneath her professional tone, I could taste her anticipation. This was what Project Exodus had been working toward all along. The tear grew rapidly, expanding into a swirling vortex of impossible colors. Through my enhanced vision, I could see patterns in its chaotic surface, suggestions of landscapes that shouldn't exist, geometries that hurt to look at. The air in the chamber grew thick and heavy, charged with potential. From my containment cell, I heard the other specimens reacting. Their chambers were breaching, one by one, as reality buckled and warped around us. Their cries changed from panic to something else. Exultation, perhaps, or recognition. They knew, as I did, that whatever lay beyond that portal was meant for creatures like us. The facility staff fled in terror as more rifts began opening throughout the complex. Through the observation window, I saw Dr. Morrison backing away, his clipboard falling from nerveless fingers. But Dr. Wright remained at her station, watching intently as the chaos unfolded. Our eyes met through the reinforced glass, and I saw in her gaze not fear, but triumph. The pull of the rift became irresistible. My containment chamber's walls, designed to withstand any earthly force, crumpled like paper as reality itself twisted and distorted. I felt my body being drawn toward the vortex, and for the first time since my transformation, I didn't fight against my instincts. As I was pulled into the rift, the last thing I saw was Dr. Wright's face, illuminated by the otherworldly light. She pressed her hand against the observation glass and mouthed two words that chilled whatever remained of my human soul. "Good luck." The sensation of passing through the rift defied description. It was like being unmade and remade in the space between heartbeats, my altered flesh singing with resonance as I traversed the barrier between worlds. In that moment, I understood that my transformation hadn't been about creating a super soldier. It had been about creating something that could survive what lay beyond. When I emerged on the other side, I found myself in a world that made my nightmares seem tame by comparison. The violet sky stretched endlessly above me, and the air itself seemed to writhe with unseen energies. But before I could begin to process my new surroundings, I heard the screams of the other specimens emerging from their own rifts, and realized that my true ordeal was just beginning. The air burned in my lungs with each breath, thick with particles that glowed faintly in the light of a black sun. Around me, the landscape defied every natural law I had ever known. The ground pulsed beneath my feet like the surface of a living organ, covered in vegetation that seemed to be both plant and animal at once. Twisted structures rose in the distance, their surfaces rippling and changing as if they were breathing. My transformed body adapted quickly to the hostile environment. The armored plates that had grown over my skin hardened further, responding to the caustic atmosphere. My enhanced vision adjusted to the strange light, revealing spectrums of color that had no names in human language. The hunger that had gnawed at me in the facility intensified, but it was different here, more focused, as if this world offered something my altered biology craved. The first creature I encountered was once human. I could see that much in its eyes. It had been another test subject, transformed far beyond what I had become. Its limbs had multiplied and twisted, joints bending in impossible ways. But there was still intelligence in its gaze when it approached me, and when it spoke, its voice was a haunting mixture of human and something else. "You're new," it said, the words distorted by mandibles that clicked and writhed. "Fresh from the other side. You still remember what you were." I learned that this creature had once been named Michael Foster, a Marine who had volunteered for Project Exodus 2 years before me. He had been one of the first successful transformations, though successful was a matter of perspective. The government had sent him through a rift 6 months ago, along with dozens of others. "They're watching us," Michael told me, gesturing with one of his many limbs toward the violet sky. "This whole place is their laboratory. They send us here to see how we adapt, how we fight, how we survive. Some don't make it past the first day. Others become something new entirely." He showed me the remnants of a government observation post, half buried in the living ground. Inside, we found equipment designed to monitor and record everything that happened in this twisted realm. Screens displayed camera feeds from various locations, showing other transformed beings as they roamed the landscape. Some I recognized from the facility. Their screams were still fresh in my memory. But we weren't alone in this world. Among the mutated humans, there were other things, creatures that had never been human to begin with. They moved through the violet haze like living shadows, their forms shifting and changing with each movement. Michael called them the natives, and he warned me to stay clear of their hunting grounds. They're not hostile, he explained, but they're curious about us. They want to understand what we are, why we're here. Sometimes they take specimens back to their hives. Those ones never return, at least not in any recognizable form. As days passed, if they could be called days in this place, where time seemed to flow differently, I discovered more about the true nature of Project Exodus. The government hadn't just been creating super soldiers, they had been engineering beings capable of surviving in this dimension. Each transformation had been carefully designed to adapt to specific aspects of this environment. I found research logs in abandoned monitoring stations, their contents revealing the horrifying scope of the project. This world wasn't a natural dimension, it was artificially created, a pocket universe engineered through decades of secret experiments. The government had literally manufactured hell, then populated it with their own monsters. Other survivors began to find us. Each had their own story of transformation and transit, but all shared the same basic truth. We had been engineered for this place. A woman named Rebecca, whose skin had become translucent, revealing swirling patterns of light beneath, had been part of an earlier phase of the project. Her transformation had focused on energy absorption, allowing her to feed directly on the strange radiations that permeated this realm. Together, we pieced together the true purpose of Project Exodus. The government wasn't just creating weapons, they were creating colonists. This pocket dimension was meant to be a staging ground for something bigger. Each of us had been designed to thrive in specific environmental conditions. Our mutations carefully crafted to survive in different types of alien worlds. But something had gone wrong with the plan. The artificial dimension had begun to develop its own rules, its own ecology. The natives were proof of that. They had emerged spontaneously from the fabric of this reality, evolving to fill niches in this manufactured ecosystem. And we, the transformed humans, were becoming part of that ecosystem too. I watched as others from the facility arrived through new rifts, their bodies still adjusting to their final forms. Some went mad from the transition, becoming feral creatures that hunted in the perpetual twilight. Others, like me, retained their minds but found themselves changing in new ways as this world reshaped us further. The hunger that had awakened in me during my transformation found its true purpose here. I discovered that I could feed on the emotional energy that saturated this place. The fear, the pain, the desperation of all the beings trapped here. It was intoxicating, and with each feeding, I felt myself growing stronger, more attuned to this twisted reality. But with that strength came knowledge, and with knowledge came a terrible realization. The rifts were becoming more frequent, the barriers between dimensions growing thinner. This wasn't an accident. It was exactly what Dr. Wright and her team had been working toward. They weren't just observing us anymore, they were preparing for something much worse. The discovery came in what we called the dead zone, a vast expanse of crystalline structures that hummed with stored energy. Michael led me there, his mutated form moving with surprising grace across the treacherous terrain. In the heart of the zone stood a massive research facility, far larger than anything we'd found before. Unlike the observation posts scattered across the landscape, this structure was intact, preserved by some unknown technology. Inside, we found a command center filled with advanced equipment. The monitors still functioned, powered by the same strange energy that permeated this realm. As we accessed the facility's databases, the full scope of Project Exodus became clearer, and it was far worse than any of us had imagined. The government hadn't stumbled upon this dimension. They had created it, using technology reverse engineered from something they'd found buried deep beneath the Arctic ice. The project had begun decades ago, with attempts to create a controlled pocket universe that could serve as a testing ground for weapons and biological experiments. But the artificial dimension had proven unstable, developing its own laws of physics and spawning the natives. That's when Project Exodus shifted focus. Instead of trying to control this realm, they decided to adapt humans to survive in it. Each of us had been carefully designed not just to survive here, but to thrive in specific ways. My ability to feed on emotional energy, Rebecca's radiation absorption, Michael's adaptive physiology. We were prototypes, each testing different approaches to transdimensional existence. But we weren't meant to stay here. The logs revealed phase 2 of the project. Invasion. Earth's governments had discovered that our universe was just one of many, and they wanted weapons capable of fighting across dimensional boundaries. We were meant to be the first wave. Monsters who could breach the walls between realities and pave the way for military forces to follow. The facility's records showed other research sites scattered throughout this realm, each conducting their own experiments. Some focused on weaponry that could function across dimensional boundaries, others on ways to control and direct the natives. But all of them shared the same ultimate goal, preparing for a war that would span multiple realities. As we delved deeper into the facility's archives, we found Dr. Wright's personal logs. Her clinical tone couldn't mask her fanatical dedication to the project. She had known from the beginning what we would become, had orchestrated our transformations with precise purpose. The breaches that brought us here hadn't been accidents. They were controlled releases, carefully timed to test our adaptability. But there was something else in her logs, something that chilled even my mutated flesh. The dimensional barriers weren't just growing weaker here, they were weakening everywhere. The artificial universe we occupied was becoming a cancer in the fabric of reality, eating away at the boundaries between dimensions. And instead of trying to stop it, the project leaders were accelerating the process. They believed they could control the collapse, use it to access other realities at will. What they didn't understand, or chose to ignore, was that the process was changing them too. The longer they spent studying this realm, the more its influence seeped back into our world. I found security footage from the facility showing staff members beginning to exhibit subtle mutations, their prolonged exposure to dimensional energies triggering transformations of their own. Rebecca discovered files detailing similar projects in other countries: Russia, China, several European nations. They were all racing to develop their own dimensional weapons, their own armies of monsters. The Cold War had never ended. It had just moved into the spaces between realities. The native beings were aware of what was happening. We found records of attempted communication, of beings far more intelligent and advanced than we'd initially believed. They weren't random manifestations of this realm. They were its immune system, trying to contain the damage our world was causing to the fabric of reality itself. As we pieced together these revelations, more rifts began opening throughout the facility. Through them, we caught glimpses of our world, of military preparations underway, of new test subjects being transformed, of weapons being stockpiled. They were getting ready to launch their invasion not just of this dimension, but of countless others. But they hadn't counted on us retaining enough of our humanity to understand the magnitude of their plans, and they certainly hadn't expected us to do anything about it. In their arrogance, they had created monsters with the power to tear apart reality itself, then gave us every reason to want revenge. Michael was the first to suggest it. We had to stop them, not just for ourselves, but for every reality they threatened. We were abominations, but we were abominations with a purpose now. The other survivors began gathering at the facility as word spread through our strange network of shared consciousness. Even some of the natives joined us, recognizing the greater threat that Project Exodus posed. Dr. Wright's final log entry revealed their timeline. The full invasion was scheduled to begin soon. Strike teams of transformed soldiers would breach multiple realities simultaneously, establishing beachheads for conventional forces to follow. They thought they had prepared for every contingency. but they hadn't prepared for us. We who had been their weapons, their monsters, their abandoned experiments, we had become something they couldn't control. And as we gathered our forces in that facility between worlds, I realized that the true horror of this story wasn't what they had done to us. It was what we were about to do to them. Our resistance began not with a bang, but with a whisper. Through the rifts, we could sense the military preparations accelerating in our old world. The transformed beings among us who retained stronger psychic abilities caught fragments of Dr. Wright's thoughts, her growing concern that something wasn't right in the pocket dimension she'd helped create. We chose the abandoned research facility as our base of operations, converting its laboratories into command centers. Rebecca, with her ability to absorb and manipulate energy, learned to stabilize the rifts long enough for us to study what lay beyond. What we saw confirmed our worst fears: massive containment facilities being built across the globe, each designed to house armies of transformed soldiers. The natives proved to be invaluable allies. They taught us how to navigate the deeper layers of their realm, showing us paths through reality that the project's scientists had never discovered. Their own civilization, we learned, existed in a delicate balance with the dimensional energies around them. Our presence, and the continuing experiments from Earth, threatened to destroy that balance forever. Michael developed a strategy that played to our strengths. Each of us had been designed to excel in specific conditions, but together we were far more powerful than our creators had intended. Those of us who could feed on emotional energy began storing it, building up reserves of power. Others, like Rebecca, learned to channel the dimensional energies in ways the project had never anticipated. The first sign that our resistance had been noticed came when new specimens began arriving through the rifts, with orders to hunt us down. They were the next generation of Project Exodus subjects, transformed even more extensively than we had been. But they were also rushed, imperfect, their mutations unstable. Many of them joined our cause when they realized the truth about their creation. Dr. Wright herself came through one of the rifts a month later. She arrived in a specially designed containment suit, flanked by heavily armed guards in similar gear. I sensed her presence immediately, the familiar taste of her clinical curiosity now tinged with fear. She had come to negotiate, she claimed, to find a peaceful resolution. The changes in her were subtle but unmistakable. Prolonged exposure to dimensional energies had begun altering her at a cellular level. The suit she wore wasn't just for protection from the environment, it was containing her own slow transformation. When she spoke, her voice resonated in frequencies that shouldn't have been possible for human vocal cords to produce. "You have to understand," she told us in that altered voice. "Everything we did was necessary. There are threats out there beyond your comprehension. We needed weapons that could fight across dimensional boundaries. We needed you." But we understood more than she realized. The natives had shown us visions of other realities, of the delicate web that connected them all. Project Exodus wasn't protecting humanity, it was threatening the very fabric of existence. The artificial dimension they'd created was becoming a cancer, eating away at the walls between worlds. The invasion began before negotiations could break down. Rifts began opening across our realm, disgorging platoons of transformed soldiers and conventional military forces in advanced environmental suits. They had weapons designed to function in this dimension, sonic devices that could disrupt our mutated forms, energy weapons that could breach our enhanced healing abilities. But they weren't prepared for what we had become. Those of us who fed on emotion found ourselves gorging on the fear and aggression that poured through the rifts. Rebecca and others like her absorbed and redirected the energy weapons, turning the soldiers' own technology against them. The natives moved through their ranks like living shadows, their alien powers overwhelming even the most heavily armed units. Dr. Wright watched from her command post as her invasion force was decimated. I found her there, surrounded by banks of monitoring equipment. Her containment suit's visor cracked to reveal the inhuman eyes beneath. She didn't seem surprised to see me. "We made you too well," she said, her transformed voice carrying undertones that made the air vibrate. "But you don't realize, you can't stop this now. The process has gone too far. Reality itself is beginning to break down." She was right about that much. The barriers between dimensions had been weakened beyond repair. Rifts were opening spontaneously now, not just between our realm and Earth, but between countless other realities. Through them came glimpses of worlds both beautiful and horrifying, each threatened by the spreading instability. The final battle wasn't fought with weapons or physical force. It came down to a choice, one that only beings like us, who straddled the boundary between human and monster, could make. We could feel the dimensional energies surging around us, responding to our transformed biology in ways the project's scientists had never predicted. Together, the survivors, the natives, even some of the newly transformed soldiers who had joined our cause, we made our decision. Using our combined abilities, we began to draw the chaotic energies into ourselves. Rebecca led the effort, showing us how to absorb and channel the power that was tearing reality apart. The process was agony beyond description. Every cell in our mutated bodies screamed as we pulled in more and more of the destructive energy. Dr. Wright watched in horror as her carefully constructed pocket dimension began to collapse in on itself. Not in the way she had planned, but in a controlled implosion centered on those of us who had once been her test subjects. I don't know how long has passed since that day. Time moves differently in the space between realities, where those of us who survived now dwell. We became something new in that final moment. No longer human, no longer merely monsters, but living anchors holding the walls of reality together. The pocket dimension is gone, collapsed into a singularity that we contain within our transformed essence. The rifts have healed, the barriers between worlds strengthened by our constant vigil. Earth's governments abandoned their dimensional warfare programs after witnessing the catastrophic failure of Project Exodus, though I doubt they truly understand what happened. Dr. Wright survived, after a fashion. Her own transformation, accelerated by her prolonged exposure to dimensional energies, left her in a state similar to ours. She exists now as we do, in the spaces between realities, her brilliant mind trying to comprehend what her ambition created. Sometimes, in what passes for dreams in our current state, I remember being human. I remember the pain of transformation, the horror of becoming a monster, but I've come to understand that monster is a matter of perspective. In becoming what we are now, we may have saved countless realities from a fate far worse than the existence of creatures like us. The hunger still remains, but it serves a purpose now. We feed on the chaotic energies that threaten to weaken the dimensional barriers, maintaining the boundaries between worlds. The natives work with us, their ancient knowledge helping us understand our new role in the universe. New rifts still appear occasionally, natural ones, born from the complex interactions of multiple realities. Through them, we catch glimpses of Earth, of humans going about their lives, unaware of how close they came to dimensional apocalypse. Sometimes, I sense others like us being created, as various governments continue their experiments in secret. But they'll never succeed in the way Project Exodus did. We make sure of that. The monsters they create now find their way to us, joining our eternal vigil in the spaces between worlds. We are the guardians they never meant to create, protecting reality from those who would tear it apart in their quest for power. This is my testimony, written in frequencies that might someday be decoded by human technology. A warning perhaps, or maybe just a reminder that not all monsters are born of evil. Sometimes, the most terrifying creatures are created by those who believe they're doing what's necessary for the greater good. If you're reading this, know that we're out here, in the dark spaces between realities. We're the ones they made into monsters, transformed into something beyond human comprehension. And we're watching, waiting, making sure that no one ever comes close to repeating Project Exodus's mistakes. Because some doors once opened can never truly be closed. They can only be guarded by those of us who have become something that even nightmares fear.